Hi, my name is Alex, and I work in an office that has seen its fair share of strange stories. Among all of us, there was one person who stood out, a young woman named Rose. Rose was in her early 20s, full of energy, and was known for her dedication to work. She was the kind of person who'd always be focused, clear headed, and professional. Because of her exceptional work ethic, she was popular among both her bosses and her colleagues. Rose usually worked the day shift, from 9 to 5, but there were times when deadlines or urgent tasks required her to stay late. She never hesitated to take on extra work, and that's what made her so dependable. In a short period of time, she had made a name for herself and had become the go-to person in the office. One night, we were all working late due to an urgent project. It was around 10 p.m. when Rose received an inbound call. Now, calls that late weren't common, but it wasn't unheard of either. She picked up the phone and answered in her unusual, cheerful, and professional tone. "Hello, this is Rose from Global World. How can I assist you?" We didn't think much of it. Normally, these calls don't last more than 5 to 10 minutes. So we expected her to wrap it up quickly, but as the minutes passed, something felt off. Rose was still on the call. 15 minutes turned into 30, and she was still talking. At first, we joked about it, signaling to her to hurry up so she could join us. But then, we started noticing her behavior. Her expressions had changed dramatically. The cheerful and focused Rose we knew was gone. She looked angry, almost like she was struggling to suppress something. She wasn't speaking much, but when she did, it was in an odd language none of us could understand. Her voice was low, almost guttural, and she clutched her head as if she was in pain. What struck us the most was her appearance. Her face looked pale and sunken, as if she hadn't eaten in days. Her lips were cracked, and her skin had an eerie, almost lifeless texture. We were frozen in place, exchanging nervous glances, unsure of what to do. Something was seriously wrong, but no one had the courage to confront her. Finally, one of her close friends walked over and took the phone from her. He said, "Let me handle this." But when he brought the phone to his ear, there was nothing. No sound. He checked the call logs, and to everyone's shock, the call had been disconnected over 30 minutes ago. So who had Rose been talking to for all that time, and what was she saying in that bizarre language? Before we could process what had just happened, Rose suddenly stood up. Her movements were rigid, almost robotic. Without saying a word, she walked straight to the main exit, leaving her bag, laptop, and everything else behind. We called after her, but she didn't respond. She just left. The office was silent after that. No one knew what to say or do. Everyone was scared, whispering to each other about what might have happened. Our office had always been rumored to be haunted, but this was the first time any of us had experienced something so terrifying firsthand. The next morning, we all returned to work, still shaken from the night before. Rose didn't show up. We tried calling her, but her phone was switched off. Concerned, we decided to visit her apartment after work to check on her. When we reached her place and rang the doorbell, an older man answered. He looked puzzled when we asked about Rose. "Rose? She doesn't live here anymore," he said. "She moved out 6 months ago." We were stunned. How could that be possible? She had been working with us every day up until last night. When we explained this to him, the man gave us a sad look and said, "You should talk to her parents. Here is their address." Determined to get some answers, he went to her parents' house. Her father opened the door, and when we mentioned Rose, he immediately broke down in tears. Between sobs, he told us something that sent chill down our spines. 6 months ago, Rose had been in an accident. She was on her way home from the office when it happened. By the time she was brought to the hospital, it was too late. She had passed away. We stood there in stunned silence. It didn't make sense. If Rose had died 6 months ago, then who had been coming to the office every day? Who had we been working with? And who or what had answered that call last night? Her father then added one final detail that still haunts me to this day. Last night, he said, I called the office to discuss some issues. A young woman answered. She said her name was Rose. I thought it was strange, but she was very helpful. At the end of the call, she asked for my name. And then the line went silent. I have always been passionate about history and visiting old exhibitions. One day, I planned a trip to the Natural History Museum of London. I took the Matador to Central London, grabbed a coffee, and entered the museum as a student, armed with a notebook and pen. I spent the day exploring the wonders of the museum, taking notes and immersing myself in the fascinating history of ancient artifacts. Hours passed without me noticing as I was completely absorbed in the exhibits. The museum buzzed with visitors, but as evening approached, the crowd began to thin. I found myself captivated by one particular exhibit and noted down some details about it. Just then, a man who appeared to be in his mid-50s approached me. After getting me with a polite, "Hello," he struck up conversation. "I've been observing you," he said with a warm smile. "You seem deeply interested in history." I replied, "Yes, it's my hobby. History is my favorite subject. I love learning about ancient artifacts and studying them up close." After the initial pleasantries, I asked him his name. He introduced himself as Robert and mentioned that he worked at the museum. He then asked about my college and where I had come from. I told him I had traveled an hour by Matador just to visit the museum. Our conversation flowed effortlessly as we exchanged stories about our lives and our mutual love for history. He shared fascinating tidbits about the museum, and I found myself thoroughly engrossed in what he had to say. As time passed, I noticed a man approaching us from the entrance. He carried a flashlight and a set of keys, and his uniform suggested he was part of the museum's security team. The guard stopped near us and addressed me directly. "Sir, the museum is closed now. In fact, it's past closing time. What are you still doing here?" We made multiple announcements over the speakers. Perhaps you didn't hear them. I apologized, explaining, "I'm so sorry, I had my earbuds in and the music was at full volume. I didn't hear the announcements. That's my mistake." The guard was understanding and replied, "It's okay, please follow me. You can come back tomorrow." As we walked toward the exit, I couldn't help but notice that the guard only addressed me. He didn't even glance at Robert, who was walking beside us. This struck me as odd, but I brushed it off as we rushed the main gate. Before leaving, I turned to Robert and said, "Goodbye, Mr. Robert. It was nice meeting you. I hope we cross paths again." Robert smiled back and waved back. The guard, however, looked confused. "Who are you talking to?" he replied. I said, "To Mr. Robert, your colleague, the man I was just speaking with." The guard's expression shifted to concern. "Sir, there's no one here named Robert. I only see you standing here. Are you feeling okay?" I insisted. "No, I was talking to Mr. Robert. He works here, doesn't he? He said he works at this museum." The guard's face turned pale. "You must be mistaken. Robert was our caretaker, but he passed away a month ago." I froze in disbelief. "What are you saying? That's impossible. I was just speaking to him. He was alive, standing right next to me." The guard calmly said, "Come with me, I'll show you something." He led me to an office and pointed to a photograph on the wall. My heart sank. It was Robert's picture, with his name and the date of his death written below it. Exactly 1 month ago. I was stunned, unable to comprehend what I had just experienced. The man I had been speaking to was no longer alive. Shaken to my core, I left the museum that evening and walked home in a daze, replaying the events in my mind. I never returned to that museum again.